Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Rosen, please.
Thank you, Chairman Reed. Of course, Ranking Member Wicker isn't here, but we really appreciate that you're holding this timely hearing on the ongoing war in Ukraine, which sadly comes shortly after the one-year anniversary of Putin's brutal and unjustified invasion over Ukraine's sovereign territory. And as I've said before, the United States and our allies, I believe, must stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes for the Ukrainian people to win. Now is not the time to back down, especially with spring. As we know, the weather presents an opportunity for Ukrainian counteroffensive. So, Ms. Mazzicat, what is your assessment of the ability to rapidly and effectively provide some of these newer weapon systems and advanced technologies to Ukraine? And I want to also bring up this point. How can the Pentagon, do you believe, improve its acquisition system to quickly adopt and maybe field some of the off-the-shelf technologies that are going to enable Ukraine off the battlefield, things that we can do there?
Thank you, Senator. I think about needs for Ukraine on two different timelines. There's the immediate needs, which we've talked about, artillery shells and additional small arms to prevent these Russian frontal assaults. I think some of the more advanced systems that we've talked about today, like the F-16s or ATACMS, there is a lead time with that with training, but I agree with my panelists, if you never start the process, you never start the process. Right. When the war kicked off, I believed that it was really urgent for the Ukrainians to receive air defense systems, and I still think that's a really urgent thing that we must sustain. Mm-hmm. The Russians are working at chipping away at that over time with missile salvos at Ukrainian cities using Iranian Shahed drones. If they're able to attrit those Soviet-era SAMs or some of our IRIS-T or NASAMs that have been provided, it would allow the Russian Air Force to come back in a very large way, and I worry that that would be very dangerous for the Ukrainians. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move on. I'm going to come back to you, Ms. Mazzicat, but I want to move on to Dr. Stent because we've been hearing some of the conversation here, but of course during Putin's address to the Russian people just last week, he reiterated his warnings to the West, and I'm going to quote, he said, global confrontation. And so, are his threats intended for our domestic consumption or for us here in the United States, just for domestic consumption inside Russia? Do you foresee a more aggressive Russia thinking about his global confrontation posture, perhaps cyber, that he hasn't really played much? You say, well, maybe they don't see them marching here, but the cyber attacks can hit you pretty hard as well. So, Dr. Stent, what's your opinion on that?
Thank you, Senator. I think his speech was directed both to the domestic audience and to the foreign audience. He's telling his own people this war is a war with the West, with the United States. It's going to go on for a long time, and we're going to prevail. He said, we're going to win on the battlefield. And he's basically telling them that they have to accept it. And for us, he's threatening us that there are things that he hasn't done yet that he could do. Now, having said all of that, he wants to intimidate everyone. The Russians haven't done some things that we thought they might do. They have not attacked any of the convoys carrying weapons into Ukraine, either from Poland or Romania. I think at this point, Putin still is not willing to get into a direct conflict with NATO. And there has been less cyber. I mean, there have been obviously some issues, but there have been less cyber attacks than we maybe feared that there might be. So that indicates to me that until now, he is observing some of his own, red lines or limits, but he wants us to believe that he could go much further. And so I think it's our task to try and discriminate between what are probably just empty threats and things that we should take seriously.
Thank you. And I'm going to build on that with you, General Kellogg, then, because we think about these threats, and of course they come maybe cyber, and they also come with missiles. And we know Russia's stockpile of missiles, they've fired thousands since the beginning. They're using their Soviet-era munitions more and more. So what do you believe is the status of Russian munitions and their supply chain, and how, if they're running low, as Ms. Mazzicat talked about, maybe having to move back up production, how will this counteract, how will this play in these counteroffensive, actually just in the next few months?
Senator, thank you. Senator, they're at a stretch right now. Look, Senator, they're refurbishing T-62 tanks. Those tanks have been out of the inventory for over 40 years. But the amount of losses they've sustained in their modernized armored forces have been tremendous. They are falling back on systems that we haven't seen in the inventory back in the Cold War, back when I was stationed in Germany years ago. So their stocks are running low. That doesn't mean they don't have a lot there, but you can see they're using munitions that are not guided. That's where I would get concerned where either the Iranians or Chinese are going to step up and provide them the munitions they are currently don't have to be able to use. That's the reason why I believe the United States has an ability to continue to put pressure on them. And I realize it's a heavy lift, but the more we do it, it counters the Russian ability to continue to fight this war. They're basically, in my opinion, the Russians are on their heels, both tactically, operationally, and strategically, and their supply chain is being broken right now.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm going to submit a question for the record on what you all might think will be their next, if they're on their back heels, what you might predict will be their next form of aggression that we need to look forward to. But my time is up, so I will send that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Rosen. Senator Sullivan, please.